Hello and welcome to our fourth Wednesday workshop. I'm so grateful to have you here, even though this is the first one that we're hosting in the summertime. And so this is the first of our series of Wednesday workshops that we're going to be hosting throughout the course of this summer, where we're going to try and keep things a lot more abbreviated, but really just wanted to still have these opportunities to spend a little time together and explore some of the really important topics that come up when we're working with young people and we're preparing to be helping and supporting our children. And so I'm really grateful to have you, for those of us that are here live and for those that are going to catch up with the recording later. I'm just so grateful to have you as part of what we're doing here. So first and foremost, I am Josh McNeil. I'm the director of Lakeside's Neurologic Initiative. And our goal with these is just realizing how difficult this past year was, wanting to just have a platform, have an opportunity that was available to anyone and everyone to share ideas and best practices for just supporting young people, recognizing what a difficult year it's been and the amount of stress that they have all been experiencing throughout this year. So we are going to this summer be responding to some of the questions that have come up from so many of you as you've been giving us information and filling out questions when you were signing up for these workshops. So today we are going to be focusing in on relationships, which is one that we've heard from quite a few of you. And then after that, we're going to be exploring SEL, which is one that we've also heard from quite a few people. And then lastly, the idea of physical space and how do we set that up? And I thought that was appropriate as we get into August and people are beginning to think through, how do we set up our classrooms? How do we even set up our home spaces for educating our children at home? And so we'll be able to explore just some of that as we're moving throughout this evening. So as we dive into tonight, like I said, we're going to be talking about the power of relationships and understanding really what that means, what that looks like, and the role that that plays, both positive and negative, with children. We're going to take a little bit of a look at some of the science of relationships and understanding that, once again, both the good and the bad. But really, I want to make sure that we're spending a lot of time just touching on what are some of the practical things that we can do with this information. How can we really take that and really change what we're doing at home and what we're doing with students immediately so that we can really begin to reap some of the positive benefits of understanding the brain and understanding what's really going to create the best environment for the children that we're working with to be successful. So as I'm going tonight, please feel free to type in any thoughts, comments, questions that you might have. I'm going to talk try to keep it as brief as possible. Like I said, for these summer sessions, 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll respond to any questions you might have, and then we'll call it a night. So we will, from there, go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, if you've been to any of these sessions before, and if you haven't, they're on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to check them out. We always relate everything back to the brain. And so we understand and recognize that our brains are developed in a way that we really want to be attuned to where am I operating at different points in time. And we're understanding that our brains begin developing in utero, and the experiences that we have starting there and all throughout can really impact how the different regions develop. And with that in mind, it's really going to impact how we behave, how we connect and relate to other people, and how we can really perform academically. And so we always want to be tied in and connected with that basic understanding of the brain. And so today, instead of looking at all the regions of the brain, we're really focusing in on the limbic level of the brain. And I know that when we spoke last time, we talked a bit about this regulate, relate, reason idea. And so what we're really focusing in on is that relate piece. What I think is interesting about the relate piece is I think that it's something that a lot of people understand. They get the basics of it. They recognize the importance to relate and connect to their children and to students. But when you take it a step further, there seems to sometimes be this little gap where they're not quite sure, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? Does it mean I need to be every student's best friend or parent figure? Or do I need to come across in the polar opposite and just I'm a complete authoritarian, or keeping that distance there? And so figuring out what does that look like, what does that mean, and finding that kind of fine balance there. And so we're really going to be, staring at this whole relationship idea, that relate side, and understanding the importance of what that means and what that looks like this evening. And so there's a pretty popular quote by Dr. Bruce Perry, and as you know, we've done a lot of training with Dr. before, and he says, fire can warm or consume, water can quench or drown, wind can caress and cut. So it is with human relationships. We can both create and destroy, nurture and terrorize, traumatize and heal each other. And I think that is such a powerful quote to start with, because we automatically say, yes, relationships are good, relationships are important. But what's important for us to be recognizing with that is that it really is a two-way street. Relationships, quite frankly, are pretty inevitable. We're going to be in relationships with others, whether it's close relationships or not is maybe a little bit up for grabs, but we're naturally going to be connecting with other human beings. And so with that said, it's not so much are we going to have relationships, it's what's the impact going to be of them. And we're recognizing that often these can be positive, but at times these can actually be very negative as well. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at both sides of that. And so if you have a young child who's born and they have parents or the caregivers that really are kind of unpredictable, not very nurturing, don't show the quantity of love that child would really need or benefit from, that's going to change how that child really grows and develops. And so really, first and foremost, your brain is going to be under a greater deal of stress. Your brain's going to have then a heightened stress response system. Lower regions of the brain are not going to develop in what you would call a neurotypical fashion because of the fact that it's consistently under stress. And so instead of trying to learn and understand the world around it, it's fully embracing, how do I stay safe right now? What's this person going to do next? And trying to really make sense of all of that. And so if you have a child who grows up with experiences like that, first and foremost, they're going to assume that most or all people behave that way, that all people are unpredictable. All people might seem like they are loving one minute and then the next minute might yell or might be physical with you, where there's just that belief that you don't quite know. There's that unpredictability that's going to exist there with those people. And so we're recognizing that's their view of the world, because if you're born into a home and into a family, you don't automatically assume that everyone else is different than your own parents. If that's all you're exposed to, then that's really what you're working with and dealing with at that point in time. And then you're likely going to be treating others in the way that you've been treated. And so as children are growing up and they are getting out into the world, whether it's getting into school, whether it's doing different things in the community, what's predictable is that they're going to mirror a lot of the behaviors that their parents or caregivers have been enacting up until that point in time. And sometimes those behaviors are not very appropriate. Sometimes those behaviors don't really fit into what you would expect somebody to be doing at that age or in the different circumstances that they're in. But what's important to realize is that's not a child saying, oh, I know this is wrong, but I'm choosing to do it. It's a child saying, this is all I know how to do. And so we need to be able to grow in our understanding and acceptance of that they are simply enacting what it is that they are used to. And then lastly, and this is a key one, and we're going to revisit this one again, but creating situations for predictable outcomes. And what I mean by that is, if you are convinced that everybody is unpredictable, that people hate you, that they think you're worthless, that they want to come down on you, if that is something that you are actually convinced of because that's been your experience up until now, and then you come into a classroom and a teacher is saying, oh, I'm so happy to see you. Oh, I'm so happy you're here. You might have a little bit of that honeymoon period at first, but then after a few weeks, that child's like, all right, this isn't going to stay this way forever. This person is going to yell at me at some point. They're going to tell me I'm worthless at some point. They're going to shut me down at some point. And so as we talked about in a previous Wednesday workshop, the brain loves predictability, even if the predictable thing is not a positive thing. And so the brain wants that person to actually do something negative, say something negative, or enact the experiences that they've had up until that point in time to prove, okay, I knew that my theory of the world was accurate. And if it's not happening naturally, the child is likely going to do things that would push the buttons of that other person or that adult. They're likely going to break rules. They're likely going to behave in a way that would be likely to get that person to raise their voice or talk down on them. And so that's them trying to create that situation that is going to give them the outcome that they would have predicted in the first place. Now, what's so fascinating about this is that this is not necessarily a cognitive decision that the child's making. They're not necessarily, though sometimes they are, but they're not necessarily, laying in bed in the morning thinking, okay, this teacher's got to hate me, so what do I need to do? Instead, it's this automated thing that they're doing throughout the course of the day that is going to hopefully bring about that response that their brain says, okay, I knew that my understanding of the world was accurate. I knew this was right. And therefore, finally I got this person to yell at me or say that. And I knew all along you must have hated me. I knew all along, despite everything else you said, those were lies. You think that I'm worthless. You think, and fill in for whatever the narrative is of that child right there. And so when you have negative relational experiences, and there's so much more that we could dive into about this, so much more we could dive into as it relates to attachment, but looking at it from a very brief perspective, these are some of the key elements that we want to be attuned to and some of the predictable outcomes for somebody that might have some negative relational experiences. But if you have positive relational experience, there's a lot of great things that happen. And this is if it happens when you're young, but also these are things that are very positive throughout life. You're going to reduce stress in that child. So when that child is able to be around you and feel like they're calm, I always say when I'm working with adults that your goal is that that child is going to walk into the building and just by seeing you or being around you, they feel safer. Just by being in your presence, they know I'm with somebody who cares about me and values me. That makes me feel safe. I know somebody's protecting me physically and emotionally, and that reduces the stress load of that child. That should be one of our primary goals as we are collaborating and working with children, whether it's our own kids, whether it is children at school that are in your classroom, or any other place where you're collaborating with children. We want our goal to be that they feel safer. Their stress is reduced when they are around us. It helps to improve their neurodevelopment. So I talked earlier about how the brain is going to be wiring together. And if the brain is not hyper-focused on safety, it's going to be able to learn about other things that are occurring in the world. And so if that's a young child, then that is what you would call the typical neurodevelopment that you expect them to be gaining that's age appropriate as they are getting older and older. But if it's for an older child, what this quite frankly means, and Casalino even talks about this, is that if that stress level is low because they feel connected to you, they're simply going to learn better. They're going to be in a better spot for that neurodevelopment of the cortical content that you're trying to teach them. And then additionally, their self-worth is going to grow and increase as they begin to understand and accept, all right, somebody thinks highly of me, somebody loves me, somebody cares about me. That proves that I'm somebody worth caring about, that I'm somebody worth loving. And that's an idea that that child's able to then accept and grow with and expand. And so really, we can tell that there's great importance at any phase, at any season here of really showing those connections to kids, really helping them to feel heard, feel cared for, and know, once again, that when they're around us, they're around somebody who cares about them and values them. Now, the tricky thing here is that there is a natural conflict when we're trying to establish positive relationships with someone who's had negative relational experiences up until that point in time. So let's jump back, especially to that idea that a child is going to try to create a predictable outcome that really matches some of the negative relational experiences that they've had. And so we have that combating against this idea that somebody recognizes, oh, I need to have a great connection with this child, and that's what's going to help them grow. And the more that you're trying to say, oh, I'm here for you, I care about you, I love you, the more that that child is likely to exhibit more and more behaviors of concern so that you finally snap and yell at them, raise your voice at them, blow up at them. And so that is really, really important that we recognize that these two things are going to be in conflict with one another. And so a couple key elements here, and then we're going to dive into a few specific things, is first off, predict that that will occur. Predict that with your own children even, or children that you might be taking care of or involved with in your life, or children in your classroom. Predict that there's going to be times that they're going to behave in a way to get a predictable outcome. And so when a child, especially one that perhaps you felt like you had a good connection with, suddenly exhibits these big behaviors of concern, we need to recognize that there might be a reason behind that, that there's something else going on, that they're trying to create that predictable response. Recognize that it's not personal. Even though it's relational, it's not always personal, because once again, it's about their brain seeking a semblance of safety more than it is about them actually not respecting you, not caring about you, and trying to push it that way. And we really just need to then prepare ourselves. Expect that, be prepared for, think how we can really handle some of these difficult situations, because our bottom line is we need to support the child. We need to not give up on that child. And that's what we want to make sure that we're being consistent with. And so a few just kind of practical ideas, things to consider as we're wondering, how do we support these young people? I just said this a second ago, but first and foremost, don't give up. And that seems really simple and straightforward, but that's actually very complex, because I often say that the greatest downfall of every teacher or every parent is that we're also human beings. And the thing about human beings is that we are relational creatures, but the thing about relationships is that they're reciprocal. And so you give and then you receive. You connect with somebody a little bit and then you expect to get something back from them. And when you don't, even though it could be a student in your classroom or your own child, you begin to withdraw more and more for your own self-preservation. And so being aware of that, once again, is so important. So we know not to give up, to stay consistent, stay present with the child, because once again, that could be the predictable outcome that, oh, the teacher doesn't talk to me anymore. Well, the reason we didn't talk is because you didn't respond the last 30 times I tried to talk, and now I'm giving up. But in reality, once again, that's that predictable outcome that the child might be really focused on. Another thing to think a lot about is to be mindful of our nonverbal communication. So once again, we really want to be thinking through with that child that they want that predictable outcome. And so they're not only going to be listening to what we're saying, but how we're saying it, the look on our face. Most people accept that about 90% of our communication is nonverbal. So it's not just about saying the right thing all the time, but it's about looking like we care, smiling when we see them, looking sincere when we're talking. Our body language, if we look aggressive or if we look like we are calm and caring and supportive, they're going to be hyper analyzing our behavior. And so we need to be mindful of that and making sure that they're consistently getting a message that is, once again, one of support. Finding healthy boundaries. I think this is important. We don't want to be, as I said at the beginning, a child's best friend, a child's parent figure. That's not our goal with any of this. And so we've probably all kind of found that person that overstepped the bounds a little bit, and they're getting too relational with a child. That's not really going to be too healthy most of the time, because that's kind of setting them up for another unpredictable relationship piece. And so figuring out that regards, what is your role in particular? Once again, is it parent? Is it administrator? Is it teacher? Is it counselor? But being able to really figure out what is that healthy boundary? How do I show love without kind of crossing lines? And also, how do I show the love and support that child needs, but be realistic for how many other kids I might need to be showing an appropriate level of support with? Pay attention to the child's personal triggers that they might have. So figure out what the things are that often are going to set them off more, or some of the predictable things they might be looking for. Is it a raised voice? Is it certain words? Is it yelling from across the room? So figuring out what are those things that child in particular is going to struggle with, and working extra hard to avoid some of those things. There's a lot of information out there that's actually implying now that short positive connections may be a lot more important than long ones. Dr. Perry talks a lot about this in terms of just kind of these micro relationships, these micro connections that you can have, where it would be so much better to have 61-minute little positive interactions with a child than a 1 hour sitting together with them. And so thinking through, especially, once again, this works really great at home too. It doesn't have to be, all right, we need to sit down and really have a heart to heart right now. But it could be, let's spend 3 minutes together and then I'm going to step away. Let's spend 5 minutes together and step away. As a teacher, it might just be proximity. I'm going to walk next to the student, or I'm going to make sure that they hear a couple of positive things from me. But it doesn't have to be, all right, we're going to have lunch together every single day for 30 minutes. Once again, it's going to be more beneficial if it's, I'll go out of my way to see them in the hallway once or twice. Then I'm going to make sure that they hear me when I'm in class. And so really planning those really short moments can be really powerful and, quite frankly, a bit easier to fit into our day. And then lastly, and perhaps most important, apologize often. Don't hesitate to tell a child, hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I shouldn't have raised my voice, or I'm sorry if I made you feel a certain way right now. Once again, they are often a child that's had negative relational experiences is going to try to create that outcome, that predictable outcome that could be, once again, us yelling at them, us belittling them in some way, shape, or form, or whatever it might be. And we want to work really hard to not do that. But the bottom line is either we are going to do that or they're going to perceive what we're doing as crossing that line sometimes. And so I find that it's so helpful to follow up with a child and say, hey, I'm really sorry that you felt that way. I didn't mean to disrespect you that way. I didn't mean for you to experience that the way that you did. And so following up, those have been some of the most powerful conversations we've had because, while it might be unavoidable that they're going to fit us into some of their daily narrative, what I think we can certainly avoid is them recognizing that no adult is willing to connect with them. No adults are willing to apologize to them, and letting them know you're somebody that is worth this. You're somebody that's worth hearing me say, I'm sorry, and you deserve better. And as children can hear messages like that, that is something that's extraordinarily powerful and can really make a long-term impact, not only in your ability to continue to connect well with them, but also, once again, in helping them to feel safe when they're with us and improving some of that neurodevelopment. And so as we begin to wrap up here, I do want to, once again, I don't believe any questions have been typed in yet. If you have any questions or comments about any of this, please feel free to type it in. Obviously, there's so much more with relationships. I wanted to touch on a few of just these basic elements that that can go along with this, some basic things that we'd be able to try. If you have other questions that come up after this, or if you're one of the people that are watching the recorded version of this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through social media, reach out to us through email. All of that information is up on the screen right now. We would love to connect with you. But I'd also say, it's summertime. I hope that you are taking care of yourselves. I hope that you are getting an opportunity to relax a little bit right now. And really being able to just focus on yourself, because that's going to put you in one of the best possible spots to be able to support students. One person wrote in, that's really interesting about short interactions are better than the long ones. And one of the things that's fascinating about this as well is that's definitely great all along while we're supporting students, but it's also a tactic that you can utilize early on in a relationship or a connection with a child to actually improve their familiarity with you a lot more quickly as well. And so one of the things, once again, that Dr. Bruce Perry speaks about is if he has a child that he might be meeting with and needs to, for whatever reason, develop a connection really quickly, he actually comes and goes out of the room, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in that initial interaction. Oh, I forgot something in the other room. I got to go get a drink. I got to, making up excuses. But each time you come back in, you're kind of tricking the brain to be like, oh, this is a brand new interaction. Oh, so now after that 1 hour, I've spent 6 different times with this individual. And so you feel so much more familiar to them at that point in time. And so we want to really be thinking through, what does that mean? What does that look like? And once again, if a child can see us, or hopefully many people at home in the school building that are having many of those quick interactions with them, it's going to make them feel like they've got a lot more people around them and that they're very familiar and safe in that environment there. So if there are no more questions, I want you all to get back to your summer, get back to taking care of yourselves. We look forward to seeing you next week when actually I'm not going to be speaking, but Alexandra Murtaugh is going to be leading a session on increasing social emotional skills in children. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you again. So thanks so much and have a wonderful night.